Hello, friends, and welcome back to Heartscapes, where we are exploring the system of Reiki at the intersection of self-reflection, spiritual practice, and social action. My name is Michaela, and I am happy to also welcome you back to Reiki Crossroads and Connections, this ongoing series of conversations exploring the many pathways that are available to us to remember our true self, come back into wholeness and into connection. Today, we're going to be talking with a woman who works in the realm of Chinese medicine, of acupuncture, and the realm of Taoism, and exploring the really exciting connections between that realm and the Japanese roots of Reiki. So I want to welcome Annie on with us.
Hi, happy to be here.
Yeah. So Annie McDonnell, you are the alchemist behind Joy Alchemy Acupuncture. And really, through that lens, have an opportunity to connect people back to their embodied sense of themselves as a being in nature, and to really align their health journey and their wellness needs with that remembering. And I'd love to just hear in your own words what drew you into that work, what feels really juicy about it, and just what's alive for you today inside of that work.
Well, actually, what's alive for me right now, I just before getting on this call, I got off a call with a collection of acupuncturists listening to a premier acupuncturist who's studied the tradition of the Chinese New Year, because the 22nd, we're going to shift into a yin water year, not a yin water rabbit year. So we were getting kind of, as a community, we're getting kind of a collective update on the new energy coming in this year and what it might mean health-wise and weather-wise and initiative-wise. But one of the beautiful metaphors that the teacher offered up was connecting to research that a woman scientist is doing up in, I think, Vancouver, Canada, looking at how trees actually communicate with each other through their network of roots, and that the metaphor was that we each have our own taproot that goes down deep into the soil and collects the water deep beneath the surface and brings it up to the leaves. But we have that taproot, but then we have all these other branches that make up this whole root network beneath the surface. And we're always communicating back and forth with each other in these subterranean, subconscious ways. And so I thought that was a beautiful, both a metaphor and a reality, that we're living in this earthly realm that has so much mysterious magic that we're only beginning to really understand scientifically, and that ancient cultures understood intuitively. But so I think this feels like a juicy moment to communicate with each other. I know you and I have, I think our roots have met beneath the surface before, and it's a beautiful time of year also, that, when you look outside and you see the bare branches and cold in the air, the frozen ground, but there's so much life going on that we just can't see in front of us. So
I absolutely love that you started there, and I know I want us to circle back to some more details about your work, but I wanted to just kind of um, touch into that point of roots connecting, because it feels so like one of these moments of synchronicity. Firstly because it's raining outside, and in my region, this is the only time we really get water coming from above. Um, and it's a very potent time in this region for that reason. And my year-long Reiki program is beginning tomorrow. Our cohort launches tomorrow, and one of the central metaphors and meditation focuses that we use is exactly what you just described: that taproot, that brings us down into the deepest nutrients that we need, and then those side roots that connect with each other, and then the way that water moves through that system as a point of connection, nourishment, and communication. And from the Buddhist underpinnings of Reiki, really bringing our attention in that physiological, kind of biological way that we are all interconnected, because we can observe that in the world, right? I love that you said that, we all come from people who far back enough had an intuitive knowing of these things that we're now starting to be able to look at scientifically, but through intuition and observation, really seeing these ways that the world operates that we can feel inside of ourselves as well. So we know that a molecule of water moves around inside of the water cycle and moves in and out of us, right? In and out of our bodies. And that literally water connects us in that way. There's water in my body that could actually have been in your body at a certain point, And so we really actively work with those metaphors. And so that's like, it felt like a blessing or a spell that you just cast over our beginning. And then just this morning, my teaching teacher was like, "Do you want a research project?" And I'm like, "I mean, not really, but sure, why not? I got a lot to do, but I'm always game." And he's like, research the connection between rabbit and water, and for that reason that we're about to open that year, and pointing out that this particular confluence of rabbit and water, that element, that animal, happens very rarely, and that in my life it'll probably only happen once. In his life, it'll happen twice. He was 9 the last time that there was a water rabbit year. So anyway, that all just feels very alive. And I love that you started there. I just wanted to kind of draw that point of connection, and then turn it back over to you to tell us a little bit about your practice.
Sure. Yeah, there's so many. Nature is such a beautiful way of understanding the world because we are nature. We don't always like to admit it to ourselves, but we are nature and we're part of nature. And one of the things that really captivates me about traditional Chinese medicine is that it both comes directly out of nature. It really originally springs from Taoism, which is the philosophy of, the energy flowing through the world, how to flow in harmony with that nature, close observation of natural phenomenons to help us understand ourselves and the world. But it also, the language of Chinese medicine is very natural metaphor based. So we talk about, diagnosing conditions as maybe too much heat or too much damp, or, when you get an infection, we talk about it in terms of wind, like wind penetrating too far into the interior. So when you're studying it initially, it can be, like a bit of a mind shift, especially if you grew up in a Western culture where everything has to have a complicated, intimidating name that, polymyalgia, for rheumatica, and doctors kind of create a veneer of authority and mystique through using these very scary, complicated words. And Chinese medicine really distills it down into, okay, you can call it that, but a way to understand it is that, your blood is stuck and we need to get things moving or flowing, or so it's something that I think I'll be learning and studying for my entire life, because it's really trying to understand the deep mysteries of interconnection and optimal health. But one of the things that I like about it is that it does feel immediately accessible on a human level, and a lot of it does come. A lot of it, people kind of can dismiss it easily because a lot of the advice sounds like something your grandmother might tell you. Like wear a scarf and drink hot beverages in winter, and work with the seasons rather than against them, and like get enough sleep. But this stuff that sounds so simple it's not so easy to do, for one thing, especially in the modern world. So it's simple but not easy. But there's great power in simplicity, and that's one of the things I'm constantly relearning myself. And I enjoy teaching people. Part of what I do in my practice now, I do some virtual sessions where you can't use acupuncture needles, obviously, but because acupuncture is really based on the energy of the body and the energy system, which I'm sure you know quite well through Reiki, that energy works on kind of a quantum field. So I have found that it is surprisingly effective to be working with someone through Zoom and just kind of guide them into doing acupressure on certain acupuncture points that might be more potent for what they might need to move through. Do some qigong breathing, do some sound healing work, and all these just like an accumulation of small little shifts can very naturally and gently lead you into a state of more ease rather than dis-ease. So that's a little bit about my practice. Here, which you want me to go deeper into?
Yeah. Well, there were two pieces that you shared in there that feel really closely connected to each other and also closely connected to kind of the worldview that I work inside of as well. One was this idea that we are in fact nature, even though we want to pretend that we're not. Humanity has spent so much effort and so much energy to step outside of the cycles of nature in ways that are understandable. All right. I mean, outside of technology and without the ability to electronically heat our homes or, acquire food when when the ground is frozen, like these are important advances that supported us. However, over time, we got to a point where we're really like, well, we can just opt out of the cycles of nature, right? We can just
Yeah.
like to the point like we're not even an animal, like we're some
Right.
whole other category of thing, and whatever is happening out there in the world doesn't actually have to impact me because I can step outside of that. And that there's been obvious short-term benefits for that, but the long-term illness and dis-ease, not only to our own self but in the way that we inflict that on the world, on the
Mhm.
earth, is profound, and it's compounded over time in ways that we could, there's other people doing podcasts about global warming in ways that could speak to it in much more depth than I am.
Yeah.
But that piece, that simple idea that humans are in fact nature and are in
Mhm.
fact both subject to the cycles of the world, but also um, profoundly benefited by stepping inside of that. And then this other piece, connecting to that is this other piece around simplicity, that like you're giving advice that somebody might be like, well, that's so simple, or that's something that, yeah, my grandmother would have said, or that's, this folk medicine perspective. I need the science, I need the all of the pieces. And sometimes we do need some of those pieces, but the the buildup of all of that disease of believing that we can step outside of the world leads us to this mindset that the solution to our illnesses is has to be incredibly complex, and it has to be, it has to have all of these different layers and all of this technology that, in order to be well, and what you're saying and and what I'm saying and other practitioners kind of along this path are saying is that the solutions are profoundly simple, and they're simple but not easy, as you just said, because we have to implement them slowly over time, right? They have to be
Mhm.
lifestyle, they have to be mindset, they have to be worldview, they have to be habit. They can't be an intervention that comes in after we're already totally messed up,
Yeah.
It's like we have to realign ourselves back with the way that the world functions.
Mhm.
And then once we do that, it's simple, simple, simple things
Yeah.
like what you just named. And there's something so um if you can get past any resistance that one might have to the simplicity of it and the like, no, there has to be more. That's not complex enough, which I completely had about Reiki. Like I took
Mhm.
all of these more and more and more complex kind of Western forms of Reiki trying to find the most effective form, and it got less and less effective,
Mhm.
right? It came back to its original form because it's effective, but
Mhm.
also incredibly graceful, incredibly simple. But if we can get past that aversion, then it's incredibly empowering to be like, oh, these are simple things I can actually implement in my life without a whole lot of effort, you know? And to be able
Yeah.
to sit with somebody on Zoom as you were just describing, and rather than you being the only expert in the room who's administering the medicine, to collaborate with them as their own
Mhm.
expert, right? In their own expertise about what they're experiencing, and offer the tools and guidance that you have and expertise that you have so that they can implement their own healing by administering the points, by taking on the habits in their life, by doing the meditations. Incredible, I would imagine, because I've seen this happen when I work with people in a similar way with Reiki, where they're, you know, collaborating with me as an expert rather than just, you know, submitting to my expertise, if you will. But I would imagine, and I guess that's my next question is, you know, that this would be very empowering for your clients. And I'm curious if there's anything that you've observed or witnessed, kind of around that.
Oh yeah, it's amazing to watch, and it's a real privilege and honor to try and cultivate the space for that to develop in someone's journey. Um, I think I mean, there's so much in it, so much wisdom in what you just said. I'm trying to like which angle to go through first, because I want to speak to all of it. Um, but I think one of the underlying problems that people don't necessarily are they're not consciously aware of. I think subconsciously we're all deeply aware of it. Um, that there's granted, everyone's talking about trauma nowadays, and there's certainly a lot of trauma healing to be done across the board. But I think what we collectively are suffering that hasn't been named as much is the the existential trauma that of being removed from nature in the way that we have, in that profound disconnection to our source, um, and so that creates all sorts of ripple effects that simple solutions you won't necessarily see quick results because there's been such a profound disconnection at the root of things that mending that really is a committed process of reclamation to our connection with ourselves, with each other, with nature, um, honoring that connection, finding ways that we can honor that in ourselves and in the world. um, but I think one of the kind of Instagram things that you'll see is oh, just trust your intuition. That'll and that sounds good in theory, and I do agree that each person should trust their intuition. But what happens is it's hard to even know what your intuition is when you're so profoundly disconnected from yourself, and so in your head that, like you said, doing one, I'm definitely like, I am addicted to taking more classes because I always want to know more and I always want more tools in my toolbox. Um, but then, like the more classes you take, the more you see like, oh, okay, a lot of this is about like the teacher's presence and what they're transmitting through, like a really good teacher, what they're transmitting just through their presence and their being.
Yeah.
And then you start seeing some of the common underpinnings to all these glittery classes with different approaches and so forth. Um, but what I really try to help people do is to tune into their intuition so that they can start to make different choices without so many voices in their head of, well, I just read this story that like fat is unhealthy or sugar's bad or this is what I'm supposed to be anxious about this week or this is the newest insomnia hack I have to try. And it just is so overwhelming to the nervous system. So I find anything that I can do, whether they're lying on the table getting acupuncture, or whether they're speaking with me through Zoom, is to try, as much as I can cultivate in myself, to be calm and present and listening to what wants to reveal itself in the moment, and to help them feel safe and calm and quiet to tune in what might come up, um, and then to try these gentle exercises to help your body. Like we spend so much time, like you said, trying to be above, for convenience's sake, be above nature. And like I appreciate electricity. I'm really glad for it. But if you're under lights all day, it's going to mess with your sleep rhythms. Um, but so anything that, like, we confuse ourselves so much by just trying to control our bodies in oh so many ways, that it's really easy to miss signals from your body and miss intuition because the communication channel isn't really open well. So I think that's like one of the foundations of, again, maybe it sounds abstract, and or maybe it sounds overly simplistic, but when you can, through Reiki or through acupuncture or through a sound bath or through Qigong or through just walking in the woods, the more you can bring your mind and your consciousness back into your body and start to listen to your body's own rhythms and what's feeling out of harmony, your body then doesn't have to scream at you with pain or acute inflammation, or all the acute skin rashes, or all the ways that our body is just trying to help us, actually. um, so so trying to nurture a relationship where, like personally too, I had a corporate job for years where, it just like hit me like, gosh, like I almost never actually like go to the bathroom the first, like my bladder is so well trained that, like, I work through lunch, or I don't get up to go to the bathroom because I'm on this deadline. And we're so ingrained in that it really is a process to start to unwind that, and have be more of a nurturing presence to your own body, so that your body can then feel safer to actually communicate with you. And when that starts to happen, then it is amazing to hear the things that people say, like when they come back to earth from being in like a sound bath. And I had people say that they, during the meditation, they actually met their younger self, like their inner child, and got a message from them. I've had people who have like tell me, again, because like once the trust is established between me and someone, they may have been coming for several weeks or even a few months, and then they may get up off the table and say something like, oh, I feel like we're unwinding so many like pain patterns, like my shoulders feel better, but now my hips are hurting. And I was on the table and I remembered, falling when I was a kid, and I just got this flashback to that. So it's an amazing process. And it's something that, like, I could never go to school to learn how to, like, fix you. All I can do is to try and help you tune into your own amazing wisdom,
Yeah.
and invite that to come forward rather than suppress it further.
This is such a important piece that you're bringing forward around intuition. And I think that, it's one of these things that definitely, as you said, kind of makes the meme circuit, online, for good reason. It's an important topic, and it's something that has definitely garnered more like appreciation and validity inside of, even corporate spaces and, spaces that, kind of over the last few years have come to more acknowledge that kind of unseen wisdom, right, as being valuable, like in these kinds of settings. But the point that you make, that before we can trust our intuition, we actually have to have access to it, right? And we have to understand its language, and we have
Mhm,
to be reconnected with the part of ourself that can speak that language. And so much of us, because of the things that we've been talking about, fundamentally that trauma of dissociation from the natural cycles, and then every other, personal challenge that we may have had, and the ways in which we've attempted to protect ourselves from harm that, if we didn't get good support and guidance, likely caused us to disconnect a little bit more from our body,
mhm,
from our pathways, that we can't necessarily trust our intuition without doing
mhm,
some of that reconnecting work. And I spent a lot of time with this. I did about a year of a monthly gathering called Intuition Lab, that was literally an experimental space for kind of asking this question: how do we reconnect to our intuition?
mhm,
I had had a, direct experience in my history of, absolutely losing touch with my intuition, which I have come to understand as this integration between our body, our mind, our feelings, and our connection to the rest of the world, right? It's that place where all
mhm,
of those things come together. From the perspective of Reiki's origins, I think of it as that point of connection with all of life, where our own body's wisdom are the things that we know in our mind, the things that we feel, and the ways in which we sense into the world around us, including things like empathy and mirror neurons, and then also, the unseen roots and pathways that we have out into the world, all of those things coming together to give us access to information that we wouldn't necessarily have if we're only relying on our mind or any of those other things, or just or being told from other people, right?
mhm.
And so many experiences in our life when we're not well guided in this way, or we don't have a mindset or a worldview, a culture that reminds us and gives us support to reconnect those parts of ourselves when they've been fractured, we just get more and more fractured. And so when we
Mhm.
say, well, trust your intuition, well, what voice am I hearing? Right? Is it my intuition,
Right.
or is it my deep rooted fear that's trying to keep me safe and
Mhm,
is therefore going to tell me to run the other direction when I'm actually supposed to be, doing
mhm.
this thing, right?
Right.
Is it my limiting beliefs about the world? Is it my prejudices? Is it beliefs about other people that are rooted in oppression, that are rooted in,
Right.
you know, disconnection with each other, that's actually speaking to me? Is it the voice of my trauma? Is it the voice of that teacher from third grade who was so mean, and told me that I
Yeah.
was no good and that like I couldn't, get anything right? Like, what voice is it that's actually speaking to me right now?
Mhm,
And so, what we worked on in that year and then on subsequent work is really that reconnecting piece first. And it
mhm.
was incredibly affirming because, well, guess what? Reiki, from practiced from the perspective of its Buddhist and Shinto origins, is absolutely about that, right? It is
Mhm.
specifically about reconnecting your body, your mind, your voice, your
Mhm.
heart, your energy, bringing those all back together into a collaborative space with the world around us and with the cycles of life around us. And from that point, through practices that are simple, simple, accessible, graceful, elegant, um, then we can trust the information that's coming, and we
Mhm.
can get in a practice of observing the outcomes, right? Because it's like you can't 100% know until you observe the outcome of what of the choice that you made, right?
Right.
This intuition. I tend to hold the view that our intuition absolutely cannot steer us wrong. Like, it absolutely is the place where our greatest good and the greatest good of everything we're connected to lies. But we don't know if we're
Mhm.
actually moving alongside of it, sometimes until we actually observe what the outcomes are. Um, anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but I love that that's a starting point for both of us, right? That we're like,
Mhm.
okay, inherently your system understands what you need and is going to move in the direction of what you need. Let's work on making sure you can understand and follow those instructions, um, so that you rely less and less on me as a practitioner
Mhm.
and more on, your own collaboration with the world and with your own self. So yeah, I love that point of connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and one of the places that I know, has that this dynamic and others that we've talked about has been meaningful in your work and in mine as well is in the realm of navigating grief and navigating loss and understanding our relationship to grief and loss inside of the framework that we've been discussing, inside of the framework of the cycles of nature, the cycles of life, and how being connected with those cycles and feeling ourselves to be a part of the world in that kind of animal way, really, really does support us in moving through what can sometimes feel like insurmountable and, uncarryable, experiences around grief and loss. And so I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that piece and maybe a couple of insights that you've learned from that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, grief is such a huge topic, and I'm amazed at how, like, for the most universal experience, it's so little talked about. But I guess it's part of the taboo that draws me to it because it is, and just let me even define it too, because I think that's a common misconception that grief just means like you're sad for a little while after someone dies. And one of the things that I find most compelling about grief, both to work with and to really feel and try and understand, um, is that it is this whole mosaic where it's these, I love kaleidoscopes, and if you just picture these shards of broken glass constantly rearranging themselves into new patterns, constantly off balance, that like grief really is like, you feel broken and bereft, and then the wheel shifts a little bit, and then you feel angry, and you feel shame and guilt and loneliness and love and happy memories and nostalgia. And it's this whole tapestry that is, if you want to understand being human,
Mhm.
grief is like, I think, one of the best ways in. Because it really is comprehensive. Um, and it's to me, it really is very tied into nature. Um, Again, to kind of, if you go back to like our theme of disconnection from the natural world, um, it kind of makes me laugh now when I look at, again, like the Instagram memes on manifestation and how it's an abundant universe, and um, mindset work on, anything's possible. Um, I definitely think that can be helpful, and there's a place for that. But if you've experienced any kind of death, you realize that anything is possible in the worst way as well as the best way. And I think it's a good grounding that, to just assume that, like, I mean, I think it is like this, very kind of capitalist mentality of like there's always more to be mined out of the earth, there's always more to buy and to have and to succeed, when no, actually, it's we are on a finite planet that needs tender loving care rather than exploitation.
And
And
the other side of abundance is decomposition. It's like
right,
everything
exactly.
that comes into fruition and into abundance in the natural world will pass and transform to be recycled. And like again,
Right.
if we hold this perception that we can opt out of that cycle and we can benefit from the abundance, but we don't have to let anything go. And we don't have
Mhm.
to let the decomposition side of things, and we don't have to observe and experience that everything is changing all the time. Right. Then we get into this space of disease and
Right.
disease for ourselves and in what we wrought out in the world. And what you're
Hmm.
speaking to is like, let's be honest about what that cycle actually means, what abundance
Hmm.
actually means. And then like,
Right.
let's have, a strategy of fortification or resilience around that so that we can participate rather than, opting out and resist.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because when you see that there is a cycle of loss, but then you can also see that then there's a cycle of regeneration and rebirth. And and it's in the clenching too tightly to any one stage that the problems really start to arise. Not, there's no way to fix grief, but it can make it easier to bear when you realize that, it's not personal. It's like this is just the way the universe works, that unfortunately, it's nothing is forever. And that everyone will, if they haven't gone through it already, they will go through it. And I think it's also helpful in Chinese medicine, emotions are tied to different organ systems.
Mhm.
And so, one of the grief, and meaning more like sadness and sorrow, is tied to the lungs in terms of like, you inhale, but you also have to exhale. It's the constant cycle: inhale, exhale. You're what you have to let go of what you can't use to bring in new energy to restore yourself in an endless cycle. But the other organ system that is linked to the lung system is the large intestine, which is about absorbing the nutrients and letting go what needs to let go. So if you, again, like, to bring it back to like a down to earth metaphor, think of how uncomfortable it is to be constipated because you're clenching too tightly. And it's all part of, we're all part of the process, that we're endlessly trying to absorb, um, absorb nutrition and joy and richness from each other and the world around us. But at the same time, we can't absorb it all. We can't absorb it endlessly. And one of the like, once you get through the acute stage of grief where it's just so, the loss is just too immense to even reckon with, if you can work your way through that, um, then you start to get into the territory that does become very rich in terms of, um, you know we have that person I lost had a limited time. This is a reminder that I have a limited time too. So if I have a limited time, what is most precious to me? And if I have limited energy, how do I want to honor that energy in the best way and not just fritter it away on, whatever distraction in the moment. So I think, reckoning with grief, there's a real treasure to be mined there. But it's definitely an uncomfortable process, um, for people. In the olden days when we didn't have the conveniences that we have today, winter really was like wondering what you'd have to eat in late February, early March, if you had, stockpiled enough to make it through the winter before the green shoots would start coming up in the spring. So, part of why I like working with grief is, our culture has left people so isolated in it. And I feel like the more I talk openly about it and invite people to work with their grief, in whatever way that feels comfortable to them, to, put their foot through the door. Um, I am, it's grief is like a wilderness, and I can't give you a map, but I've been through part of that terrain, and I can help you find some signposts, some signposts, and
Yeah.
maybe it's, like an oasis where you can, um, restore yourself for a little bit before you trek further into the desert.
Yeah. Well, and you named a moment ago that, when we experience a loss, whether it's a death or any other sort of meaningful loss, that, the other side of observing what has been lost is the acknowledgement that we will eventually lose as well, right? And that if we see somebody close to us dies, it's so much of a more visceral reminder that that indeed is what will happen to us. And this is, certainly a huge part of why we are so isolating around grief and why we are so avoidant of it, and why it is such a struggle to do what you just said, to really just sit with others who are grieving or be with our own grief and make enough space for it, right?
Mhm.
And so practices like the ones that you bring to folks, and practices like the system of Reiki, that really do plug us back into that root system where we feel ourselves to be wider and deeper than, this part of ourself that's visible, right?
Mhm.
It puts more space around all of it. It puts more room around all of the big feelings associated with it so that we can tolerate that discomfort, and not only tolerate it, but move it through, and then maybe even find a place of, stability inside of it so that we can be with each other, and reject the notion that we should be isolated in our grief. We shouldn't put that on other people. We need to keep it to ourselves. It's going to make them uncomfortable, or that person is grieving, and that makes me uncomfortable, so I'm going to just give them some space. I'm just going to
Mhm.
let them go through it, right? Which, might in fact be what they need. But, when that becomes our excuse not to engage, right, is when we are again opting out of that cycle and saying, well, I don't need to engage with that,
Mhm.
when in fact we do, right? It is in
Yeah.
fact part of that. And that, I love that we're having this conversation now at midwinter, because as you said, like, this is the season that the world is demonstrating to us quite distinctly, quite clearly, visually, in all of the ways, the decomposition part of
Mhm.
the cycle, right? Even the trees that are quite alive, that aren't evergreen, like, appear dead to us,
Mhm.
um, because they have, let go of that visual representation of life. I loved something that you mentioned, just as a biological, again, the biology and the metaphor, that those fall colors and leaves are always present, but they're covered over by the
Mhm.
chlorophyll, but they're covered over by the green. And
Mhm.
that, when they kind of let go, they let go of that kind of energy processing, that chlorophyll does, and just, surrender into rest, that it's then that those amazing fall colors come. And those fall colors then have to give way to the release of those leaves altogether.
Yeah.
um, this is the season of building soil, right? It's the season where all
Mhm.
of those dead things, when things are being allowed to operate the way they should, all of that death is going back into the soil, and is slowly, slowly being transformed back into life. As a gardener, I very actively partner with that. Like, I don't
Mhm.
let a single leaf that falls from my trees leave this property, right? It all gets gathered. It all either goes back into the mulch, or it goes into the compost, or
Mhm.
it goes into the garden beds, because it's like, it's not discarded waste. It's
Mhm.
essential, components of life that, I won't have a garden if I don't, continue to put that back. Um, you said something in our last conversation. You said when you put your hands in the soil, you see all of the teeming life that exists in the darkness. And that just felt like such a, like, winter medicine, right? Like, when we really lean into the cold and the darkness of this time, like, the abundant life that's there is revealed, that it's both
Mhm.
alongside of each other. Um,
Yeah, and I think, it's that classic, like, everyone's afraid of the dark. There is something primal about it, and something very survival oriented about it. But in leading people through meditation practices, um, there is so much teeming life at the center of the darkness. So, and I think part of the problem is we put so much judgment around emotions and around ourselves. Um, but I think if you lean into, whatever you're feeling within grief in that moment, if you lean into, and I know the instinct understandably is to like run the other way or to just, save it for another time. But especially if you're working with someone who won't shame you, who has the space to be with whatever uncomfortable emotion, and to anchor you so that, I've told people like it sounds funny like over Zoom, but like if you know collapse into tears, it may feel like you're going to drown and float away, but I'm here.
Mhm.
I'm not going to interrupt this because these tears need to flow. But at a certain point I may just say something like, you know you're here, I'm here, and at the end of that, you usually feel so much better letting what wants to flow. And it's at that point then that you can start to look at the, like the decaying leaves, how they nourish the soil. You can start to reflect on, what is there in that anger at my parent that has a core of energy or wisdom that can nourish me into my next cycle of growth. Or, what one of my teachers in grief talks a lot about. Like the final, if there is a final stage to grief, like the final stage is to make meaning.
Mhm.
So it's to the point where you still feel sad at the loss, but you've opened up enough space to remember the love and what you want to carry forward. And I know like my parents live within me, and when I make decisions to honor them, or when I follow in their footsteps in different ways, that's their nourishment feeding me, and hopefully I can feed the world through what they have, the legacy that they have left me. But it's to get to that conscious intention, you do have to swim in the muddy depths for a bit. But it can help to, we're, again, something that we've forgotten or disconnected with. We are communal beings, and our nervous systems are wired to regulate with each other. I love teaching people self-healing and self-care tools, but you can't really heal in isolation. There's so much fundamental healing you can foster within yourself, but at the same time, we also need relationships to heal. So a lot of grief work is just being willing to, you don't have to know the perfect thing to say. You don't have to know the perfect thing to do. It can mean so much to someone to just be willing to be with them in
Yeah.
that dark place.
Yeah, and perhaps the greatest treachery of trying to escape the grieving process is the loss of the visceral feeling of love and connection, because
Mm-hmm.
love and grief are, essentially linked in our
Mm-hmm.
mortal, vulnerable experience. I'm a big nerd and often understand things through pop culture. And one of my favorite moments in the Avengers MCU universe is comes from the character Vision, and he says, "What is grief if not love persisting?"
Oh
And
yeah.
that,
It's I think of it as like grief is love with no place to go.
right,
So part of the process is finding a new outlet for that love. And often the first place to start is turning that love towards yourself,
yeah,
and letting yourself be comfort, take whatever comfort you can without putting judgment like, oh, I should be over this by now, or oh, it was just a dog, it wasn't a person that died, or oh, it was just that. Or and what I'm finding more and more too is that I don't know that it's comparison to say like grieving is kind of a muscle, but I think it is like a practice that it's really helpful to get better at because like as a small business owner, again, like this isn't much talked about, but there's so many little griefs along the way of like, oh, I put so much love into this workshop and only one person signed up, or like
Relatable.
there's so many, and that's not just for entrepreneurs. There's just like name a person and you'll find like, or you had to move out of your apartment that you'd been in for 10 years. Like grief is everywhere, all around us, all the time. And when you start to awaken to it, you can honor it and you can get better at not letting it kind of stick to you and suppress all the, like, um you get so used to just numbing yourself out that, like you said, you can't feel love and joy because you won't let yourself feel the sadness or
Exactly.
the melancholy.
Well, and that brings us right back to, um, the name that you brought into the world, with your business of Joy Alchemy, right? And what an incredible gift and space of transformation that you hold for people, that those experiences of grief that we might resist and run from get alchemized back into joy, which is what they're meant to bioremediate, compost, decompose back into. To help people reconnect with those cycles of life in ways that are life-giving for them and for everybody else that they touch. And so, if folks want to work with you in this, if they want to jump on Zoom with you, or maybe they're on the East Coast and happen to be in your region, want to meet with you in person, how can they find you? How can they do that?
I'm my website is joyalchemyhealing.com. So you can my contact information is on there, and I am some point, probably hopefully before springtime, or maybe at springtime it will be born. I'm working on a self-paced digital course on finding your way through grief with some of these practices. So when people are, it's 3 a.m. and you don't have anyone to call or to sit with you in that dark moment, this this offering will hopefully be aimed at being a lifeline in some of those darker moments. So more information will be on my website. And if you're on Instagram, I'm Acupuncture Annie.
Nice. Those links will, of course, be down below in the video notes. I would love to have another conversation with you when your course is out, in
Oh,
particular in connection with the ongoing group I facilitate on Reiki and grief with a group of Reiki practitioners. I feel like there's a little collaborating that might want to happen in that.
oh yeah. Oh, that would be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I'm so glad that we were able to get together, have this conversation. I know that there's been a lot of powerful insights that are present for folks. So many different pools of nourishment that people can dip into from this conversation. Friends, we would love to know, for those of you listening, what stood out to you from this conversation? What little piece of medicine are you taking away? What have your experiences been around the topics that we've been discussing around intuition, around grief, around reconnecting with nature as a form of healing, and with the power of simplicity, of cultivating ways of being that are simple? Love to know how this has struck you, what questions arose, what insights, and anything that you would like to follow up on. Let us know in the comments below. Annie, thanks so much for being with me. Thank you, folks,
Thanks so
for
much. And
listening.
thank you for whoever listened. I hope this was of service to you.
Absolutely. And friends, until next time, thank you so much for joining us as you walk your own journeys with grief, with intuition, with all of these topics. May you be deeply provisioned for it. Until next time, I love you. Goodbye.